Hi, I'm Kevin Klein. Welcome to another edition of Inside Winnipeg Politics. Today we're going to talk about the Canadian Senate. And I've got two colleagues of mine from the Winnipeg Sun to talk about this, Jeff Currier and Royce Coop, who is also a professor of political sciences at the University of Manitoba. The Canadian Senate. Not a lot of people understand the Canadian Senate, but I call it the ultimate retirement plan. This is where you can go and not have to do any work at all and get paid an awful lot of money, get all kinds of air miles and stuff that you can use. You could work from Mexico. I think we had a senator that worked for Mexico for the longest time. And news has it now, before Justin Trudeau goes, because he hasn't done enough damage yet, he's going to appoint 10 more senators. Now, just I want to talk to Justin Trudeau for a minute. I'm available. And you can call me.
Me
But
too.
like, isn't this the ultimate slap in the face to Canadians?
Well, first of all, every outgoing prime minister stacks the Senate up. Every prime minister does that. This is not unique to Justin Trudeau. If there are Senate vacancies, an outgoing prime minister is going to stack the Senate with an eye to making life as difficult as possible for the next government. And so that's part of the strategy. Now, Trudeau has tried to bamboozle Canadians into thinking that the Senate appointees that he has made during his tenure are independent senators. They're not liberal senators, they're independent senators. Really. I mean, what am I? Am I an infant? What are you trying to do to me here? It's an insult to the Canadian collective intelligence to suggest that any of these people that Justin Trudeau has appointed are going to be independent. You're not going to see them blocking any liberal legislation. It is expected that they will support it. Oh, they might tweak it a little bit and so forth. But the Senate was supposed to be, allegedly, Royce, and you can give us a bit of a civics lesson on this, the chamber of sober second thought. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's ever turned out to be that way, but the one positive thing now is that you got to leave by the time you're 75.
Ooh.
At one time, senators were appointed for life, and some of those people keeled over at their desks. So 75, you gotta step aside. So that's at least one positive. But as for how effective the Senate is, Royce, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Now, before you get into it, Royce, though, but saying that you have to leave at 75, if they're all left-leaning liberals, aren't they going to file a human rights complaint and say you can't kick me out? That's age discrimination?
Yeah, maybe it's, but some of the senators getting appointed they're not really that old. They could be around for 20 years. And, the question is, does Justin Trudeau have the authority, the ability to make these appointments? Of course he does. Does that mean he should be? Absolutely not. He's a lame duck prime minister. He's on his way out. We all know it. He's got, like 2 months left. And he's making decisions and making appointments that could affect Canada for the next 10, 15, 20, 25 years. Where the Trudeau era is coming to an end, but Justin Trudeau has made so many appointments and so many bad appointments, to be honest, that the Senate is going to be frozen. It's going to be like a time capsule, frozen in time, frozen in the Trudeau era for the next 20 years. And so, I'm a fan of what the Senate could be. The Senate has a lot of powers, and it's almost equal to the House of Commons, almost, but it doesn't use those powers.
But
If we,
I'm going to come
if
after. I know you're a professor, but I got to fight you on this one. Like, if it's going to have any powers and it's going to be any good, shouldn't it be elected?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
I'm a big fan. I want elected senators, but there's real potential there to really enhance Canadian democracy. But you appoint some of these people, and then they hang on years and years after the prime minister that appointed them is long gone. It's just a shame. We need Senate reform in this country. I will bang that drum until the day I die. I don't think we'll ever see it, but yeah, no, big fan of elected senators.
Well, I'm going to jump in and I'll get maybe Jeff won't comment. And I worked with Charles Adler, who was recently appointed a senator, and media experience. I don't see how that's sober second thought. I just see that as a patronage appointment. I don't see that as benefiting anybody at all. I mean, we had an MP right here, a Liberal MP right here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, who came out and said there was much better choices. But to your point, Prime Minister can just appoint whoever he wants. And that's what we're getting. And really, I think it has to go two ways. I'd like to see somebody, when this election does kick off, either the Senate's going to be elected, or get rid of it and save the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that we spend on that.
Yeah, Royce, I don't object to Royce's point about the Senate having the potential to be an effective body of sober second thought to check legislation. But here's one of the, again, basic civics. Prime Minister says we want to craft a bill that's going to do this. So it goes to the minister's office. Minister then goes to the deputy minister and their staff and say, we want you to start drafting a piece of legislation. So they get to work on it, and they draft it, and they work on it, and it's done as a team. Right? No one person drafts a piece of legislation. Then it gets bounced up back through the deputy minister's office, and then back into the minister's office, then back into the PMO. Then they vet it, send it back to those same people for revisions. Right? It goes through all that process again. So by the time a bill actually makes it to the House of Commons, it has seen it's passed through dozens of hands, and the same eyes have looked at it many, many times. Now it gets into the House of Commons. It's tabled as a bill. It has to pass not one, not two, but three readings in the House of Commons and go through debate, gets sent back for even more revisions, and then eventually gets passed into legislation. Question is, how many more eyes do we need to take a look at that bill?
Yeah, I'm a little bit radical on some of these questions. In the House of Commons, as we mentioned before, there's real party discipline. You can have as much process as you want, give MPs as much opportunity to review legislation as you want to. But if they're disciplined, if they're whipped into voting for that bill, we're not going to get any real changes. It wouldn't be a bad thing to have a second house that's there to represent just, the Canadian phrase, a sober second thought, or to represent the interests of the regions or the provinces making changes to bills. We're not talking about outright obstruction. Frankly, I would like to see a little bit more obstruction in our government. But I think the Canadian governments would benefit enormously from a good second house that can actually give some of these bills, or create amendments to these bills when necessary. That's just, people can disagree on this stuff as well. But, we're not even close to that. I mean, with Trudeau lame duck prime minister now, what kind of appointments are we going to get? They'll be the worst of all, because he has nothing left to lose. He doesn't care about negative publicity. He doesn't care about making people mad. It'll be 100% Justin in these appointments. And I'm terrified of seeing who he's going to come up with.
Well, I lived in Alberta. I mean, I consider it home, and I love Manitoba. But I remember, the big push in Alberta to have an elected Senate, that they would only respect an elected Senate, and that kind of went away. I mean, eventually, when are the Canadian people going to, start demanding this kind of change? Because I don't know how much it costs, and I agree with you both, but I only agree with you guys if it's actually elected, because if they're not elected officials, they don't care. They can do whatever they want until apparently they're 75 years old. They can vote however they want. They can be engaged or not engaged. So it's not effective. It's just a waste of money. So how do we get Canada to change?
This comes back, and this is a whole other conversation, guys, but I've mentioned the word civics a couple of times. Canadians are ignorant about basic civics because we don't teach it well enough in schools.
Yeah.
And people graduate from high school with almost not even a rudimentary knowledge of how their own system of government works. Members of Parliament will tell you, MLAs will tell you, even city councillors will tell you, they get calls and emails from constituents asking them about questions that have nothing to do with their jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Some MP will get a phone call about a pothole on a street, that kind of thing. And so what that tells me is that Canadians don't understand the system of government under which they live. Now, we could have an hours-long conversation about that, about the merits of learning basic civics. But I think that's part of it. I think that's the root of the problem, is that Canadians don't understand what the Senate is. They don't understand how it works. They don't even understand how the House of Commons works for the most part.
But isn't that true at every level, Jeff? I mean, even if you look at politicians at city council, they don't know what their job is. They don't know what they're supposed. I mean, they're trying to make decisions and give funding to things that are under provincial purview. The provincial
Well,
government
yeah,
is trying to take care of things that are under the federal
okay,
purview.
but
I mean,
that's mission creep. That's a whole other problem at every level of government is mission creep. I'm just talking about the Canadians' basic understanding of their own government, and I think if they had a better understanding of it, they would be more engaged in the political process and would be demanding some of the changes that we've been talking about.
so Professor, why isn't that happening?
I got a big agree with Jeff. I wish there was much more civics education in the K to 12 system. There should be. Hopefully, one day we get that if we put enough pressure on the provincial government. And so when I teach second year political science classes, people kind of have a pretty good idea of what I'm going to talk about even before I open my mouth. On the elected Senate, when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister, we had a reference case go to the Supreme Court, the Senate reference. And basically what happened is that we found that you really can't make big changes to the Senate. You can't elect senators, you can't abolish the Senate without going through the big constitutional route. It's a real pain in the neck, and no prime minister wants to do it. But what we can do is, as you mentioned, Alberta, they have consultative Senate elections. They elect their senators. They elect senators, and the prime minister then appoints them if he's a conservative prime minister. There's no reason we can't do that here. It enhances the democratic legitimacy of the Senate, of the people that staff it. It's a great idea. We should do it. I'm disappointed that Brian Pallister and Heather Stephenson didn't do it, and I think we should. It's an easy thing to do that makes a big difference.
So could you also change though how long they were there? Could you give them term limits? Could you say like 8 years? Does it have to be until you're 75, or does that take a constitutional change? Because if so, then I give up.
I think it's the same thing, term limits. My memory is a bit fuzzy. I have to go check. But yeah, I don't think you can have term limits for senators. That was something that Harper wanted, and we got this very frustrating ruling from the Supreme Court. But there are things we can do at the provincial level. I think we should do them.